Oh, okay. That's better, no? So this research group understands that the knowledge produced by contemporary societies, whether scientific, technical, or cultural, is articulated in the form of discourse. That is, it has language as a space for implementation. No one at present can imagine the construction of knowledge outside the new information and communication technologies. The possibility of quickly accessing an extraordinary amount of data by means of easily accessible terminals means that units of knowledge have to be translatable either into processable units or into other languages and semiotic systems. Therefore, it seems plausible to state that the constitution of new knowledge is subject to the condition of translatability and communicability of knowledge, and that discourses are generated in which this knowledge is converted into products with market value. So, in plain English, this group is a joint venture, shall we say. It has a history of two research groups, one in discourse and translation and one purely in discourse. And we have united forces to create a group in discourse per se. Some of the researchers are very strong in discourse analysis without the translational component, and others are more interested in translation from a discourse analysis approach. That's a little bit the long and the short of that. Okay, so if you want to click on líneas de recerca, okay. Because we are a joint venture, there are many members, which I can show to you, but right now we also have then a fair amount of research areas where our various members are working in, and I'll go through them as quickly as possible. We have oral genre analysis, and this is the interest of this one is the knowledge of oral discourse is fundamental for acquiring an awareness of speaking skills in different contexts and is based on conversational analysis and the ethnography of communication. Theoretical perspectives are worked on in order to analyze both monologic and dialogic discourses, different types of interactions, and specific features of verbal communication in different social contexts, and these are analyzed. Okay? Second one, political discourse. In this framework, we explore the situational dimension of discourse with a descriptive and interpretative purpose. The different genres of political discourse have a crucial importance in the construction of social meaning, the particular constraints to which they are subject, and the masking strategies usually employed by political professionals are a challenge for the analyst. The third one is discourse and popularization of science. Dissemination is a discursive practice that is developed in the relationship established between the scientific community and society in general through different media. The object of analysis focuses on the use of language in oral and written contexts. It studies the recontextualization necessary to transform scientific language into common language, specificity of explanatory discourse and its procedures. Fourth one, discourse and knowledge. Knowledge based on beliefs agreed upon by epistemic communities and the attribution of knowledge in discursive contexts. Cognitive theory focused on the typology of knowledge and the ways of managing it in textual construction. Okay. The next one, discourse and genre. The discursive construction of genre, starting with basic theoretical concepts such as Butler's performativity, Bourdieu's symbolic violence, and Foucault's ajustement. Subsequently, multimodal analytical protocols are developed for discourse analysis. Real interactions are recorded on video, focus groups, interviews, advertisements, films, written and oral documents are all worked on. One of the most common analytical activities is to observe the normative regulations imposed by the dominant discourses on bodies and interactions, and to detect discursive processes of social transformation. 7. Sorry, 6. 6, yes. Discourse and social transformation, critical discourse analysis. This one studies how social transformation is discursively constructed at a time of crisis like the present, when citizens all over the world are organizing themselves against economic systems. One might call them market dictatorships. And they no longer feel represented by political institutions. New discourses emerge and give meaning to indignation and proposals for action. The purpose is to detect how these new discourses are constructed and what socio-cognitive transformations they entail. 7, multilingualism and diversity, sociolinguistic studies. The management of cultural and linguistic diversity is a key issue in a society that is more heterogeneous than ever and is constantly changing and evolving. From the theoretical concept of multiculturalism, we have moved on to those of interculturality and transculturality, where diversity is proposed as a new basis for development, creativity, innovation, and also for social cohesion, equity, and coexistence. Political discourses in urban environments as a unit of analysis. The goal is to analyze whether, beyond the rhetoric of diversity as a positive value, there is actually a concrete and effective management of urban environments. And 8. Discourse pragmatics, contrastive corpus, and enunciative linguistics. The aim of this line of research is to analyze and describe the pragmatic, semantic, and grammatical features of lexical markers and idiomatic phraseological units, particularly those that have an epistemic value and or an evident value in various discursive genres. The approach is primarily contrastive, Catalan, Spanish, French, English, and German. The aim of the research is to observe the process of grammaticalization, behavior, and formal and functional differences, similarities of the language units analyzed in the process of elaboration and interpretation of a discourse in a given text genre. 9, translation of feigned orality. Feigned orality is the fiction or illusion of orality that a written text seeks to evoke through specific resources, i.e., resources that are typically considered oral. This line describes and compares the linguistic facts that characterize feigned orality in 2 languages, and also studies the translations that have been made of works that include fragments of feigned orality. 10, translation studies of multimodal genres, namely audiovisual translation, various phenomena to culture in different types of audiovisual translation, especially dubbing and subtitling, but also issues of accessibility, for example, subtitling for the deaf and hard of hearing, audio description, and others. And topics such as the translation of humor, the treatment of multilingualism within a film, and then how that's translated. The translation of disorderly language, scripted, which is, one of our PhD students did a PhD coining the term, which I think will be very successful. Disorderly language is defined as fictional, scripted language by speakers who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, okay, and how that is portrayed, okay, as a different kind of language, okay, and also the translation of feigned orality. 11, we're getting near the end now. We have the lucky number 13, okay, right. So the translation and discursive approaches in legal economic translation. I think that one is self-explanatory. Legal translation based on methodological instruments of contrastive textual analysis and comparative law. The linguistic, cultural, and textual elements presented by these types of texts are analyzed in order to identify translation problems and propose possible solutions. Okay, and also work on corpus of texts as well. 12, last but one, appraisal and translation. In the framework of functional systemic linguistics, appraisal is a resource for communicating interpersonal meanings that show the willingness of the sender to establish a dialogue with the receiver, conditioned by the relations of power and solidarity between participants. This is a type of meaning that is characteristic of literary texts, but is not alien to legal or economic texts. In this line, we study the presence of valuation of appraisal and its treatment in two different fields, specifically legal, economic, and literary. We compare the translation strategies applied in each field. And last but not least, stylistics applied to literary translation. So you might get the feeling that this one might overlap a little bit with the, with the previous group. But in topics of translation, because of interdisciplinarity in translation studies, a certain amount of overlap is unavoidable. Okay, so some of our members are, shall we say, literary inclined, and hence this line. So the translation of linguistic, discursive, and narrative discourses that contribute to form the style of writers and achieve certain textual effects. Okay, I'll just give you a personal opinion now, which is I think that within translation studies, the division between literary and non-literary translation has not been a very useful one. At least in my experience of research, theory, and practice, the best findings of literary translation are of interest to non-literary translation and vice versa. And this is one of the positive aspects of discourse studies, because discourse is not very interested in this divide either. So an a priori division that this is literature, this is not literature, I think is harmful to translation studies, okay? Both regarding techniques, impact, reception, labor, all various aspects, okay? But as I say, that's me peddling my, my own approach there. Okay, so we have two live projects. If you could click on Proyectos de Recerca. We have a history, a rich history of projects, but at present we have two where it says vigents, two which are in progress and officially approved and being financed and kind of thing. The first one is called Frames y Narrativas de la Traducció y la Migració Europea, FANTAME, and this project aims to contribute to research. If you want to click on it, Carmen? Yeah, okay. For those who can read Catalan. If not, I'll read it in English.
Shall we use the Spanish interface?
Doesn't matter because I'll read it in English anyway.
But
Okay, okay.
Because that will be more helpful to some.
Not a problem. This project aims to contribute to research in the role of translation as a control mechanism for different types of migration, and in the study of discursive patterns and at the translinguistic level. The general research objectives are to identify frames of migration and translation in areas of migration contact in Spain and in Germany, and to investigate whether certain frames can be observed translinguistically along the corpus, which would imply the existence of identifiable transnational discursive patterns. And the other general research objective is to analyze how these frames affect the social narratives of migration and translation, and which ones can be identified in the discourse of agents working in migration contact zones and in the organization of translation in these zones. So while the media play a fundamental role in shaping discourses on migration and determining the frames that are used and perpetuated, much remains to be done to investigate how certain frames are introduced and established, and especially how this affects translinguistic and pan-European discourses. Approaches to the study of migration and its relationship to language are essential for understanding migratory processes within the European Union. Okay, and that's one project, and because I have 5 minutes, I'll move on to the next project, which is, the acronym is MUFITABI, which is a study of multilingualism scripted into fictional audiovisual series, and to see how these combinations of languages are dubbed or subtitled or otherwise audiovisually translated. Okay, so it's essentially a descriptive approach, just to see what happens, and then from an accumulation of data, then we hope to be able to show trends on how this translational problem is dealt with. Okay, traditionally, people think that, or have proposed that translation is an operation between two languages. You translate from language 1 to language 2. And this does not account for texts which have more than one language. Okay, so we need to enrich the theory, the proposal, to see what the practices are for translating texts. I don't know if you know, like a series like Narcos. Have you heard of Narcos, for example, which is manifestly bilingual? And then you have, what's the other one? Modern Family, all kinds of series and films where there is profuse combination of languages. So one of the, shall we say, myths of translation is that we translate monolingual, monodiscursive texts, okay? And increasingly that is becoming the exception, okay? So how to translate texts which include more than one language for narrative scripted purposes. We're not talking about sociolinguistic natural multilingualism. We're talking about fiction here, but anyway, the relation it might have. Okay, I am the main researcher in this project, and in the other project, Mario Bichiada and Maria Aguilar are the main researchers. Okay, you can visit this site. As you can see, it's very easy to get to. Once you get to Google, UPF GEDIT, and then you can, okay. So I think like other presentations we've had this morning, we also organize seminars, and there is, we have a number of, I think as many as 11 PhD students already under supervision of one or other of us. So we try to keep active and bring in speakers and organize seminars. I would just recommend that if any of you are interested, we can also react to proposals or requests from the actual PhD students. Because sometimes we organize a seminar and maybe not many people come. So it's better to know what your interests are too, and then we can organize events around your interests. So that's all from me. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I have a quick question from what you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
You made a distinction between literary and non-literary.
Uh-huh.
And what do you include in non-literary translation?
No, well, I was saying against this division. Okay. So, for example, for many people, like non-literary would be scientific and technical texts, legal texts. But then when you get to television and cinema, where do you put that, for example? Okay, so I think there are texts, there are novels which are written by journalists, and they have an immense amount of fact and factual information in them. We have all this news which people are telling us is fake news. So the divide between fact and fiction is becoming more and more obvious that it's a rather artificial divide. And sometimes you have to translate texts with disregard to whether they are factual or not. Okay, so sometimes what really matters is the actual discourse. Okay, how convincing they are. You can't be fact-checking all the time. So if the divide is fact or non-fact, we are in serious trouble today. And the other factor which might, shall we say, divide literature from non-literature would be quality of the language, quality of the writing. But again, I imagine you can have a concept of poor literature, bad novels, shall we say, and excellent scientific articles written in model language. So that one doesn't work too well either. But more specifically and more importantly, I would say that the key factor of whether to translate one way or another a text the key factor is not usually that it's literature or not, but it is the intention of the author, the message, the content, the style. There are so many other things. And the findings of literary translation, many of them are relevant to non-literary, I think, and vice versa. Okay, so I think in this sense, the burden of the proof is on the people who say that this divide is interesting. And I don't think they have provided sufficient evidence. Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, another break to air the room. And we will be getting on the last one. Two more. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. So, last lap, the penultimate presentation is by Dr. Daniel Cassany, who is the leading researcher in the GRAEL group, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here because it's my first face-to-face talk for 7 months. So great, yeah, to be here. And also, it's the first talk I will give with a mask, so I have really new feelings about this. And maybe it's also the first time I have to give a talk in this room also for people who is here, but also for other people who is following us online, yeah? So, it's incredible, okay? Okay, the purpose of this short presentation is just to introduce our group. You will find all the information of our group on the website. Yeah? You would just have to look for GRAEL, G-R-A-E-L. This means Group de Recerca, Research, in Catalan also, and Aprenentatge, Learning, Ensenyament, Teaching, of languages, yeah? And here you have all the information. We do research on teaching and learning languages, both in formal and in informal contexts, okay? We have researchers from different backgrounds. For example, myself, I come from the Catalan philology, okay? But we have people that come from Spanish philology, from French philology, from German, from English, and so, okay? This is not an updated picture, as you can see here. And some of the PhD students are already gone, working in different universities, in China, for example, or in America also, and we have new ones, okay? This year we have, I think, 5 or 6 PhD students new that will begin the program this year, okay? And also we work with, we can use the English version for this. Do you prefer Spanish?
Some people like Spanish.
But I have to talk in English, isn't it? Or
Yeah,
what can I do? Okay, no problem. We understand all, yeah? And if not, you can write an email to me, yeah? Both you, if you are here, or online, okay? So here, okay, I was explaining the languages. We work with different languages. We are interested in a plurilingual and pluricultural context, teaching and learning, okay? So basically our most important languages are the local languages we talk here. This means Catalan, Spanish, basically. and also English and French and German, which are the languages that are touched here, and also sign language. Also, it's interesting. But we also work with languages that bring the researchers. Yeah. So, for example, nowadays we have a researcher that is working with Spanish-speaking influencers in China, publishing posts in TikTok, for example. Okay, and we did last year, for example, another research about how a Catalan teenager learns Korean because she loves BTS, the boy band from K-pop. Do you know? Yeah. So it's not a problem. It's just a positive thing that we can add other languages, even if we don't understand or don't know these languages. But we have a very open or wide kind of interest about this. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's go to projectors, please. Can you help me for this? Okay, let's see what the kind of projects we have. Nowadays, we have 2 alive projects. The first one is this one. Please, Carmela, do click here. This is the project that I'm conducting nowadays, and it's about using videos for language learning and teaching. Okay, because we have done different projects before about fans, for example, fans doing different activities like, for example, fan dubbing, fan subbing, scanlation, working with otakus, with lovers or fans of manga and so on. And we discovered with this project that the most sophisticated teenagers usually prefer to work with videos. So this project is about how people learn languages using videos, producing videos, posting videos in the social networks, and also commenting videos. Okay, this is the project that we have nowadays. Okay, and you can see all the information. This is an open access project. This means that we have to publish all the papers with open access. We spent a lot of money, you can believe it, a lot of money paying for this. And you will find all the information about papers and researchers here, okay? Let's go back, please. And I will show you the second project. Yes, this, no, it's not this one. Go back, please. And, okay, it's easier if, yes, sorry. No, because it's, oh. Okay, this is the second one. This is the project, the other project that is still alive for the last year, okay? And this is ECODAL, and is assessing the discursive competence in different languages, okay? This means that as we here in Catalonia, we have more or less 2 or 3 languages. This means Spanish, Catalan, and English also, because most of the learners at school, at regular school, learn English, or even more another additional language. Or it happens also that some people that was born outside or has come here to live or to learn, also, for example, brings Urdu, or brings, I don't know, Italian, or brings Arabic, okay? So we have some important groups of people that are currently using 3 or 4 languages, okay? And this project investigates about if there is a general discursive competence in these languages in relation with genre, with textual genre, okay? So all the researchers of this group belong to one of these two projects, okay? And you are allowed to be enrolled in one of these or just to follow our activities, okay? We usually do a seminar monthly, and you are invited to join it, even if you have another interest, or you have another researcher, or you belong to another group, you can come to our group, okay? And we usually do, for example, we read a paper and we discuss it, a paper from other researchers related to these topics. Or we also, for example, discuss drafts from research papers from our researchers' information, okay? Or also we do data sessions. Yeah? For example, the last one was absolutely crazy and interesting. It's about a researcher we have from China who is studying how Chinese people here learn Catalan after learning, obviously, English and Spanish, and they decided to begin to learn Catalan. But as they are so technological and sophisticated, they use a lot of apps, translation apps, online dictionaries, terminological databases, and she, Ruosheng, is doing a research about how people manage this kind of technology in order to solve the problems they have in using languages, in using Catalan. Yeah? And she usually do record screens of the boards, of the laptops, or the mobiles of the learners, okay? And she studies the kind of actions these people do in using these technological tools, okay? What else? What is more important? Okay, I can show you the faces of how my colleagues. We can go back. Yeah, I will introduce the paper, the people. Okay. Okay, here you have all the people, and I think all the people have a personal web page, or also you can find the profile in Google Scholar, for example, okay, if you are looking for a supervisor. or if you are looking for assessor in your topic, okay, you can check. It's what I will do in your position, okay, just to check if any of these people are doing a research that interests me, okay. Okay, most of the people belong to this department, to your department also, but we have also people from other departments of the university. For example, Josep Maria comes from humanities, okay? And also Chinko Chunchun comes from humanities. And we have also, for example, Silvia Llach is from the Girona University, from the Universitat de Girona, okay? But we all begin. Carmen Lopez is the main researcher for the second project I introduced to you today, okay? You can have a look also to the thesis. Okay, vale. If you are interested in the kind of thesis we have already finished, here you have a list. It's not updated, I'm so sorry, but we have two theses from last July who are not yet here, okay? But for example, Maria Sanz has just won a prize for the best thesis in the field of Spanish second language teaching, okay? It's very nice research about using WhatsApp in the classroom or outside the classroom, or a group of WhatsApp for all the learners of a group, okay? And most of the tests are online, and you can check it, really, okay? And if I can answer any question now or online or whatever you want, or if you want to have a coffee, you are welcome.
So does this work? Can you check that it works, or?
We did the whole morning.
All right.
It works.
Okay.
Trust me.
Okay. So thank you, Carmen, and thank you for coming. So my name is Wolfram Hinzen, and I'm glad to present you our group, which is in the context of the other research groups in the department, and we consider forming a research community across these groups as really very important for this presential events are also very important. Yeah? So we are emphasizing presential meetings a lot to the extent that they are possible at the moment. So if you, whenever you want to take part in our activities, you are more than welcome. So here is us. As you see, we are about 10, 11 people. Some couldn't come at this particular photo opportunity. I think I have around 8 PhD students at the moment and 1 or 2 postdocs. It's quite international. So we have 3 students from the US and 1 from Chile and 1 from Slovakia and 1 from China also. And this is our grant history. So we started in 2013 and we are now kind of recognized the research group of AGAUR, and we have this ministerial grants, 3 of them until now, and we had a British one before because I was based in the UK before coming here. So this is the kind of financial framework in which our research takes place. And what is very important to us because of the clinical work we are doing is a network. So we have basically spent years to build a clinical network with collaborators, without which we can essentially do nothing. So in particular, Fundación ACE is an Alzheimer foundation here in Barcelona, who run a memory clinic from where we are recruiting people with prodromal Alzheimer's disease and also symptomatic patients with Alzheimer's. The Orienta Foundation is a center of attention for children with developmental disorders. The San Juan de Deu is a pediatric hospital of one of the best in Spain, I believe. And we do our neuroimaging there, and Valdebron, we do our aphasia research, and so on and so on. I should say in all of these cases, we have been fundamentally affected by the crisis, as you can imagine. So anything to do with hospitals, any research to do with hospitals has been basically stopped because it wasn't a priority for the hospitals. So we are basically at least half a year behind in most of the studies with these collaborators. So it's a really, really big problem at the moment, especially for PhD students who have to finish. So it's not an easy time for sure. So what do we do? What is our mission statement? Well, it's actually very simple. So we look at language as a system intrinsic to human cognitive functioning. So we think that when you function cognitively in a normal way, like right now, for example, you are listening, you are thinking, you have your own thoughts in the background, we think that to this kind of cognitive functioning, language functioning is intrinsic. So your language faculty has to function in order for you to think normally and to conceptualize the world. It's not that first your thinking happens and then language comes along later to communicate your thought. So it's not just an instrument of communication, but it's intrinsic to the configuration of your mentality. Now that makes a prediction, namely that when cognitive functioning is disturbed, which it is in mental disorders, language functioning should be disturbed as well. So if language is intrinsic to cognition, then if cognition is disturbed, language should be disturbed. So that's a very simple and very broad prediction. And effectively, this is what we have been studying, going from one clinical population to another clinical population with mental disorders. And we have found in every single case that you see alterations in language processing of a fundamental kind. Yeah? We have never found no differences. So the study domain where we test this broad prediction has been Huntington's disease, which is an early dementia that catches you if you have the relevant gene in your early 40s and kills you within 10 years and leads to erratic body movements that you can't control. Alzheimer's disease you probably know, and then we have looked a lot on schizophrenia spectrum disorders, autism, Williams syndrome, acquired aphasia, and more recently rare developmental disorders. For example, Coffin-Siri syndrome, Phelan-McDermid syndrome, that have the implication that language in these children does not properly develop. In some cases, does not develop at all, neither in production nor in comprehension. And evidently, it's a fundamental question what your thinking, what your cognition can be like when language has not developed in your childhood. All of this research takes place within a theoretical framework, which I have developed from around 10 years ago, which is called Uncartesian linguistics, and it's mostly represented in this book and in two previous ones. And that book in second edition is 2015, and I have to say that since then, I don't really have done any new theoretical work. So my thinking on this is kind of old, but I simply haven't had the time, and most of the initiative really has been to get experimental support for this theoretical hypothesis on the relation between thinking and language. Outreach has been extremely important to us. It has been intrinsic to all of our projects. And the biggest project we have had is the Talking Brains project, which is now a little bit dated. So it was in Cosmo Caixa, an exhibition on language in the brain, what makes us linguistic. It was for 1 year in Cosmo Caixa, and then it moved to Valencia. I think right now it is in Valencia, and will then move to Sevilla. And it was supposed to move around the world, but that's not clear at the moment whether this is still happening. So this was a way of creating a window to the world for our research, advertising linguistics as a science. So for the rest of the talk, basically, I have just a couple of examples, because if you want to know what we do, I think the best is just to tell you about some sample results we have had in different clinical populations. So the first example comes from Huntington's disease patients. And as I told you, these are people who are gene carriers. You can identify them at any time in their lives as carrying the Huntington gene. But they live completely normal lives until the disease becomes symptomatic. So it is very important to actually find a detector from when onwards the disease actually shows its effects. And we have been hypothesizing that in this so-called prodromal phase of the disease, you could have linguistic markers. Why? Because of the basic hypothesis. Yeah? The moment your cognition declines, which is what happens in dementia, our hypothesis would predict that language should be a marker of that. Yeah? And so we looked at domains of linguistic organization. Is it okay? Like sentence connectivity, for example. So how clauses are combined via coordination, subordination, and so on. And we see that if you look at controls pre-HD, pre-Huntington, so prodromal patients who are not symptomatic yet in a clinical sense, you see that there's a nice upward trajectory in most variables. And interestingly, if you compare the controls to the prodromal patients, you already see linguistic differences, yeah, in the way that language is structurally organized. And the important thing here is to remember that these pre-symptomatic patients are completely normal people who live normal lives and have jobs and so on. Yeah? So it's quite remarkable, I think, that you can see language catching or reflecting the disease when it's still preclinical. Second example is from schizophrenia. And there's a special symptom called formal thought disorder, which is actually clinically manifest and tested through disorganized speech. But linguists have not really looked at this very much, and we hypothesized that 10 variables that you see here would be distinguishing a formal thought disorder group from a schizophrenia group without formal thought disorder and from controls. Okay? And of these 10 variables, it turned out that only 4 were actually significant. And that's a fairy tale telling task. So patients simply talk, and we annotate linguistic variables. For example, definite noun phrases, so anomalies in definite noun phrases, in indefinite noun phrases, or in pronouns, for example. And it turned out that you see special vulnerability in patients with formal thought disorder in definite noun phrases and in pronouns. In other words, in a specific form of reference, which I have argued in my linguistic work, is inherently grammatical in nature. So there's a problem with reference to the world the moment it is mediated by certain grammatical configurations. Yeah, so there's a grammatical marker in the way you handle your language capacity, the way you use it referentially, which shows in specific linguistic variables. And definiteness is a specific area of interest if it comes to schizophrenic speech. Now, going beyond there, we have a recent imaging study where we looked at deictic processing. Now, what is deictic processing? Basically, patients were lying in the scanner and they were listening to 2 types of conditions, linguistic stimuli in both cases. In the one case, they listened to 2 people talking about worldly events without ever using first or second grammatical person, I and you. So imagine a newsreader on TV who describes what happened yesterday or today when the king visited the judges or whatever it was. Yeah? You don't have to use any second and first person for that. And then in the second condition, that was exactly what they did. So they talked about the same event, but they talked to each other, asking you, what do you think of that? And sometimes they would even address the person in the scanner. Yeah? What do you, who lie in the scanner, what do you think about that? Okay? So it's basically a study of high versus low deixis, where high deixis simply means use of all grammatical persons, and low means only the third person. And interestingly, in controls, you see magnificent differences in core language areas when you subtract the activations for low from the activations for high. So these are the activations that are specific to high when you ignore those for low. Okay? And then we have the same in schizophrenia patients, and the broad pattern looks quite similar. But if you compare the 2 groups, if you look what is more activated in controls than in schizophrenia patients, you see a couple of areas where there are differences. So there is a difference in the processing of I and you that you see at the level of the brain in schizophrenia patients. And that has all kinds of implications for self-processing, because first person relates to self, and dialogical competence and inter-social communication and so on and so on. I'm probably running out of time very soon. So I have 2 more examples, I think. So stop me when I should stop, right? Okay, so here's example 4. So we are very interested in autism. And why is that? Because language problems in autism are very prominent. So there's language delays in autistic kids in, I think, over 50% of cases. And in around 30% of children with autism, language does not develop. And what I mean by this is not that these kids don't talk. For some reason, they decide not to talk. Rather, they do not have a language capacity. This you see also in their comprehension, for example. So if it was just a problem with speech, their comprehension should be intact. But in fact, comprehension and production are both fundamentally affected in these kids. So we are interested in the brain basis of that, and this is an example of a tractography study. So this is the language connectome. It's the network of white matter connections between the core language areas, in particular these posterior temporal areas where Wernicke's area is located and the inferior frontal areas where Broca's area is connected. So it's kind of this shell shape. And we were specifically interested in the arcuate fasciculus, which is this red-yellow tract. And we see a difference in these kids in laterality. So in the integrity of this tract, but in terms of laterality. So whether it is more has more integrity on the left or on the right. In U, for example, it has more integrity on the left, because we know that the brain is left asymmetrical in language respects, and that's an example of that. Now in these kids, so below 0 means right lateralized, so quite consistently these kids are right lateralized in the arcuate fasciculus. And in another tract, which is ventral, the E4, inferior frontal occipital fasciculus, we see the opposite pattern. So in you guys, this tract is normally either non-lateralized or left or right lateralized, but in this case we see a left lateralization. And that is also very interesting here. This is about the myelin content in these nerve cells. So myelin is a protecting sheath around the nerve cells, which allows the nerve cells to communicate better. It's for information flow, okay? And normally, myelin increases until the age of 33. So you are all in good shape. Yeah? In your case, it's still on the rise. In my case, and I'm afraid, Carmen, in your case, it's going down. Yeah? And in these kids, what we see is that it's actually, with age, it's actually going down. Yeah? We had a group from 8 to 17, and the myelin in this group actually goes down with age. So there's a myelin problem. And that is very important for us because myelin is a medical treatment target. So for example, in multiple sclerosis, there's also a myelin problem. So it is kind of not impossible to think that loss of myelin is something you could medically treat. Yeah? I mean, that's music of the future, but it's not completely absurd as an idea.
I think that more or less we should be talking about.
Right. Okay. So what else do I have? Well, something on the syndromic kids on functional connectivity. It's about how regions are connected to each other in the brain. But the only thing I will say about this, and then I will stop. So this is an ASD kid. This is a child with intellectual disability of unknown origin. This is a Coffin series child, a Landau-Kleffner syndrome child, and this is a Fragile X child. And this is the connectivity of Heschel's gyrus, which is in auditory cortex, what is activated when you perceive language auditorily. It's the connectivity of that across the two hemispheres. So whenever you see activation in Heschel's gyrus on the left, you see it on the right. So this is fundamental into functional MRI. And here, the overall connectivity tends to be very low in these kids in auditory cortex. And in this particular child, which is the most severely affected, it's actually negative. So it's negatively correlated, the two sides. This is almost like in an orchestra where the first violin plays Beethoven and the second violin plays Stravinsky. Yeah? And of course, such a child cannot acquire language. Yeah? So functional connectivity, we think, is very important to detect differences in how these kids function. So that's just a couple of examples, and we are interested in linguistic theory as well, so you don't have to be interested in that to talk to us, so talk to us for any reasons you may have.
Thank you very much. I'm sure this has been like the best way to end, isn't it? With a very cutting-edge kind of research with brain studies and neurological experimental research. We've been very sort of short in time. There were many questions at all. I don't know whether we have a pressing question. Otherwise, Dr. Hinzen, as you heard, will be very happy to hear from you and to respond to any knockings on their doors. I mean, you have a website where they can contact you, or otherwise on the UPF University staff list. I mean, you are accessible. Okay. So thanks a lot. And we are sort of giving a few closing remarks together with your tutor. Mercè, would you like to come to the floor? And Maximilian, as usual, this was very interesting. Okay. So perhaps rounding up, you've seen things that maybe at 9 o'clock in the morning and you've heard you didn't expect to hear, right? The variety of themes that are dealt with and the variety of approaches to the themes and the data that we use to conduct research on them is very extraordinary. You don't get this in many departments, by the way, because departments tend to be much more focused, well, not so rich. And it has to do with the fact that we started as a translation department, and then translation is already with different languages, with different texts, and language and acquisition, so there's a little bit of history. Some of the most cutting-edge research groups like this one is relatively new in the department, right? So there's more conventional research and more cutting-edge. But the message is clear. Everyone would love to have you. Oh, yes. Everyone would love to have you knock on their doors and definitely talk to you and attend their training sessions, whatever they are. Okay? I don't know whether you have any question. I was talking about the fact that you would get all this information concerning different events through email, that in the current circumstances, quite a few of these events may be online. So for everyone who is on stream, you will be able to access those events. Not all of them, but I guess many. In fact, this is the only room in the entire campus that you can get a streaming, a recording on stream. So, you know, the availability of...
There is
another one.
Another one.
Okay, there's another one. But perhaps not with so many chairs.
Yes.
Exactly, so a smaller one.
Small.
Anyway, we were talking about rooms, spaces, and then we were discussing with Mercè that on your first seminar, she will take you around campus so that you see everywhere that has been mentioned here, so the different offices for the different groups. Someone was asking about rooms for students. The library has a special room for graduate students, and rather than master students, doctoral students. So it's very easy. You just get to the counter at the library and you ask for that room. It's open, and it's got access to Wi-Fi. You can sort of plug your computers there. So you're welcome to use that room. And then anybody with close contact with supervisors in the different groups, where there are rooms, just ask for, is there a place where I can be? Yeah? This is something that is a bit beyond my own reach, but do ask. Okay? So thanks very much for your interest, and I don't have anything to say other than thank you, and we will be seeing you around, and good luck.
Bueno, simplemente una palabra de agradecimiento a todos los que también nos ven desde lejos. Muchas gracias por la larga jornada. Yo creo que es interesante tener una panorámica de todo. La semana que viene, el viernes por la tarde, tenemos el próximo seminario. Son cuestiones administrativas, pero yo creo que no solo administrativas, sino que intentaremos ampliar lo que podamos de lo que hemos hablado hoy sobre espacios, la universidad, para que todo el mundo que ya esté aquí o aún tiene que venir se sienta cómodo y sepa moverse bien. He pensado que esta primera la podemos hacer cuestiones administrativas en línea, por tanto, os conectaré ya esta semana y ya os diré en qué Zoom o en qué Meet nos vamos a encontrar todos. En cambio, la otra semana, que vamos a hablar del contexto, en vez de estar en una aula, si hace buen tiempo, podemos buscar un espacio más amplio y hablaremos de Barcelona, de lo que os ofrece también como ciudad, de lo que queráis vosotros, del país, de las cuestiones lingüísticas y lo que queráis. Por tanto, estamos organizando también esa jornada de seminario. Y ese día podemos hacer el tour, incluso llegar a la playa si hace buen tiempo. Es decir, que lo que se trata es que nos sentamos cómodos en el programa de doctorado en todos los sentidos, no solo en el de la investigación, sino el vital también, ¿no? Aunque tengamos estas circunstancias tan extrañas.
Sí. Yo solo quiero decir quizá otra cosa. Nos gustaría que escogierais un delegado o delegada de curso. Cuando os conozcáis mejor, sería una liaising person para que cualquier tema que os preocupara o que quisierais sugerir, se lo pudierais explicar a Mercè como representante. Es decir, we would like you to choose a group representative to liaise with general matters, of course. Nothing to do with individual matters, general matters, with your tutor.
De hecho, en la asamblea o en el consejo de departamento hay siempre una plaza, me parece, o una o dos de representantes del programa de doctorado. Entonces está bien que uno sea de un programa avanzado, porque tienen unas problemáticas, pero alguien sea también de programas acabados de llegar, ¿no? Personas de años, ¿no? Del primer año o del segundo año como máximo. Esto ya os anunciaremos cuando haya elecciones y todo esto, pero bueno, aunque aún no haya elecciones, al menos tener una persona de contacto. De todas maneras, conmigo, o en pantalla o presencialmente, una vez a la semana, seguro que podremos estar y yo estoy a vuestra disposición. No diré las 24 horas del día, pero 5 días a la semana seguro.
El convenio de los trabajadores quiere. Okay, so